The unexpected call. Life had fallen into a comfortable rhythm for Jake. At 28, he had built a stable career in it, a field that suited his logical mind and problem-solving nature. Every day felt the same. Wake up, drink coffee, head to work, fix technical issues, return home, watch something on Netflix, and repeat. It wasn't bad, just predictable. But all of that changed with one unexpected phone call. Jake was lounging on his couch one evening, halfway through a rewatch of his favorite sci-fi series, when his phone buzzed on the coffee table. Without looking, he expected it to be one of his coworkers, maybe needing help with a software bug. But when he glanced at the screen, his brows furrowed. Laura, his mother's best friend. It had been a long time since they last spoke. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey, Laura," Jake greeted, trying to mask his surprise. "Long time no talk." "Hi, Jake. I hope I'm not bothering you," she said, her voice warm, but carrying a hint of hesitation. "Not at all," he assured her. "What's up?" "Well, I hate to ask, but I'm having some trouble with my computer. Something about an update. It's been driving me crazy all day." She let out a light chuckle. "I know you're busy, but I could really use your help." Jake smiled to himself. Classic Laura, always struggling with technology. He still remembered the times as a teenager when he'd come over to fix her TV remote or set up her Wi-Fi. "No worries," he said. "I'll swing by after work and take a look." "Oh, thank you, Jake," she said, the relief evident in her voice. "I'll make us some dinner as a thank you." Jake ended the call with a lingering thought. Something felt different. He wasn't sure what, but there was something in her tone, a subtle shift in the way she spoke to him. He shook off the thought, grabbed his laptop bag, and prepared for another routine fix. Later that evening, he arrived at Laura's house. Walking up the familiar front steps, he was hit with a wave of nostalgia. The house hadn't changed much since his childhood. Same cozy decor, same warm lighting, even the same welcome mat. The door swung open before he could knock. "Wow, Jake," Laura said with a smile as she gave him a once-over. "You've really grown up." Jake chuckled. "I guess that's what happens in 10 years. You look very professional." She smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "Thanks," he said, brushing off the compliment as he walked inside. She led him to her home office, where her laptop sat on the desk, screen frozen mid-update. He set down his bag and got to work. As he navigated through the problem, Laura leaned against the desk, watching him. "You always were good at this stuff," she mused. "I remember when you used to fix the remote for us back in the day." "Guess some things never change," Jake said with a grin. The conversation shifted as he worked. They talked about work, life, and eventually, more personal matters. "Some days are fine," Laura admitted, staring at the floor. "But other days, it's hard. The house feels so empty." Jake paused, looking up from the laptop. "I'm sorry, Laura. I can't imagine how that must feel." She smiled faintly. "It's just nice having someone here to talk to for a change." Jake continued his work, but he couldn't ignore the way she seemed to relax as they talked. She even teased him a bit. "So, is there anyone special in your life right now?" she asked casually. Jake shrugged. "Not really. Been too focused on work, I guess." "You? Too busy for dating?" she teased. "I find that hard to believe." Jake laughed. "Relationships take time, and I'm not sure I'm ready for all that." "Well," Laura said, meeting his gaze, "relationships aren't easy, but they're worth it when you find the right person." Something about the way she said it made Jake pause. There was an undertone there, something more than just casual advice. He shook it off and turned back to the computer. "All done," he said, standing up and stretching. "Already?" That was fast. Laura smiled and patted his arm. "Thank you, Jake. Seriously, you're a lifesaver." "No problem." She insisted he stay for dinner, and he didn't see a reason to say no. While she cooked, he sat at the counter, their conversation flowing easily. It felt natural, comfortable, but there was an unspoken undercurrent between them that Jake couldn't quite place. "You know," Laura said as she set the plates down, "it's been a long time since I had someone over for dinner." "Well, I'm honored to be here then," Jake joked. She laughed, but something about the way she looked at him lingered. Her eyes softened, and for a second, it felt like something had shifted. After dinner, he helped clean up, and when it was time to leave, she walked him to the door. "Don't be a stranger, Jake," she said, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "I mean it." "I won't," he promised. "Call me if you need anything else, okay?" Their eyes met, and there was something in her expression, something he couldn't quite define. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it definitely wasn't the same as before. As he drove home, the moment replayed in his mind. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was the start of something he hadn't seen coming. The next day, he got a text from Laura. "Laura, thank you again for fixing my computer. It's working perfectly now. You're a lifesaver." A second message popped up before he could respond. "Laura, if you're not too busy, I could use your help with setting up my email tonight. No rush, but if you have time." Jake stared at the screen. It would be easy to say no, to ignore the strange feeling he had last night, but a part of him was curious. "Jake, sure. I'll swing by after work." He didn't know why he agreed so quickly. Maybe it was the thought of helping her again, or maybe it was the way she had looked at him before he left. Whatever the reason, he knew one thing for sure. Tonight wouldn't be the same as last night. And something inside him told him this was just the beginning. A connection rekindled. The day dragged on longer than usual. Every email Jake read, every ticket he resolved, every minor technical glitch he fixed, none of it held his attention. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the evening at Laura's house. It wasn't like him to get caught up in overanalyzing things. He was a logical thinker, a problem solver by nature, someone who dealt with facts. But something about last night didn't sit right. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made him feel like something had shifted between them. Laura was his mom's best friend. He had known her his entire life. She had been at his birthdays, his school plays, his graduation. She had always been a part of his world in the same way an aunt or a family friend would be. So why did last night feel so different? His phone buzzed just as he was wrapping up work. A text from Laura. "Laura, hope you're still okay with stopping by tonight. No pressure. I know you're busy. Jake, of course, I'll be there soon." He hesitated before hitting send. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe he was overthinking. He would go over, fix whatever small issue she had, and that would be the end of it. Right. An evening unlike any other. Jake arrived at Laura's house just as the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the familiar front porch. He knocked lightly, and almost immediately, the door opened. She was already waiting for him. This time, she wasn't dressed as she had been the night before in business casual. Tonight, she was more relaxed. Jeans and a soft, off-the-shoulder sweater, her blonde hair loosely falling over one shoulder. She looked effortlessly beautiful. Jake swallowed the thought before it could fully form. "Come in," Laura said, smiling warmly. "I hope I'm not making you regret saying yes to helping me again." Jake chuckled, stepping inside. "Not at all. But if you keep bribing me with dinner, I might start thinking you're just using me for tech support." She laughed. "Guilty as charged, but in my defense, I'm a terrible cook when I'm eating alone. It's nice to have a reason to make something decent." Something about the way she said it made him pause. It's nice to have a reason. She led him to her small home office, where her laptop was open, the email settings screen displayed. "Okay, so I tried to follow a tutorial, but I think I just made things worse," she admitted, sitting down beside him. Jake smirked. Classic Laura. "Hey." She playfully nudged him, but her touch lingered for a second longer than necessary before she pulled away. Jake focused on the screen, running through the usual diagnostics. It was a simple fix. She had just input the wrong settings. "You know, you could probably handle this yourself if you gave it a shot," Jake teased. Laura scoffed. "Please, I'd rather call you 100 times than pretend I understand all this tech nonsense." "That sounds suspiciously like an excuse to keep me coming over," he joked. Laura tilted her head, a slow smile playing at her lips. "And would that be such a bad thing?" Jake's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer. He glanced at her, and for the first time, he saw it. Really saw it. This wasn't just playful banter. There was something beneath the surface, something unsaid but very real. Laura quickly looked away, as if realizing she had let something slip. "So, how's work been?" she asked, changing the subject. Jake let the moment pass. "Same as usual. Just fixing everyone's problems one tech disaster at a time." "You always were good at fixing things," she mused, looking at him thoughtfully. "Not just computers. People, too." Jake wasn't sure how to respond to that. Why did everything she said feel heavier than before? Dinner and unspoken words. By the time he finished setting up her email, Laura insisted he stay for dinner again. "This is going to become a habit, isn't it?" Jake said as he followed her into the kitchen. "You say that like it's a bad thing," she replied with a smirk. The smell of roasted chicken and herbs filled the kitchen. The table was set, candles flickering softly. It was intimate, more intimate than last night. They sat across from each other, the conversation flowing easily at first. But then the air shifted again. "Jake," Laura said, swirling the wine in her glass, "I need to ask you something." "Okay," he said cautiously. She hesitated, as if weighing her words. "Last night, I don't know if it was just me, but it felt different." Jake's heart thudded. She continued, "I know I'm older than you. I know I'm your mom's best friend. But something is happening here, isn't it?" He stared at her, at the vulnerability in her eyes. She wasn't playing games. She was being completely honest. Jake took a slow breath. "Yeah, I feel it too." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Laura let out a soft, almost nervous laugh. "God, I feel ridiculous. You must think I'm crazy." "I don't," Jake said firmly. I don't know what to do with this." She nodded. "Me neither." They sat there, looking at each other, the weight of everything hanging in the air. The logical part of Jake's brain was screaming at him. "This is complicated. This is messy. This is your mom's best friend." But the other part of him, the part that had felt something change the moment he stepped into her house last night, was telling him something else. This was real. An unspoken decision. The rest of the night carried on as if nothing had been said. They finished dinner, talked about old memories, laughed at silly things. But there was no denying it anymore. By the time Jake was getting ready to leave, Laura stood by the door, her arms crossed, watching him. "You're going to think about this a lot tonight, aren't you?" she asked softly. Jake sighed. "Yeah, I am." She smiled, but it was bittersweet. "Me too." There was a pause, a moment where neither of them knew what to do. Then Laura reached out, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "Jake, no matter what happens, just know that I care about you. I always have." Jake felt his chest tighten. He nodded. "I care about you too, Laura." Another silence stretched between them. Finally, Jake stepped back. "Good night, Laura." "Good night, Jake." As he drove home, his mind was a storm of emotions. This wasn't just a casual flirtation. This wasn't just nostalgia or loneliness. This was something more, and he had no idea what to do about it. Crossing the line between past and present. A restless night. Jake lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His mind kept replaying the way Laura had looked at him, the way she had hesitated before admitting that something had changed between them. He should have shut it down. It would have been the easy thing to do. Pretend nothing was happening. Thank her for dinner and move on. But he hadn't. Because he didn't want to. Something had shifted, and now he couldn't ignore it. He wasn't a reckless guy. He never made impulsive decisions, always weighing the pros and cons before making a move. But now, for the first time in his life, he didn't know what the right decision was. Laura was older. She had known him since he was a kid. She was his mom's best friend. But none of that seemed to matter when he was with her. He turned onto his side, frustration mounting. He needed to clear his head. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone and typed out a message. Jake, can't sleep. Thinking too much. A minute passed, then another. Then his phone buzzed. Laura. Me too. Want to talk. Jake hesitated, then typed, Yeah. Call me. A second later, his phone lit up with her name. He answered. Hey, she said softly, as if she had been expecting him to change his mind. Hey. Neither of them spoke for a moment, but the silence between them was warm, not awkward. I've been staring at my ceiling for the past hour, she admitted, thinking about everything. Same here, Jake said. I don't know what to do with this, Laura. I don't even know what this is. She let out a small, nervous laugh. I wish I had the answers, Jake, but all I know is that it doesn't feel wrong. That hit him hard, because deep down, that was what had been eating at him. Should this feel wrong? Was he crossing a line he shouldn't? But the truth was, when he was with her, when they talked, when he saw the way she looked at him, it didn't feel like a mistake. And that scared the hell out of him. I don't want to make things messy, he said finally. Neither do I, she murmured. Another pause. Then Laura took a deep breath. Maybe we're overthinking it. Maybe we should just let things happen naturally. Jake let her words sink in. Are you saying you want to see where this goes? He asked, his voice quiet. There was a long pause before she answered. I think I do. But only if you do too. Jake's heart pounded. There it was. The line. And she was waiting for him to decide if he was willing to cross it. His fingers tightened around the phone. I do, he admitted. But I don't know how to make sense of it. You don't have to, Laura said gently. Not yet. The call stretched on, their voices soft, unhurried, as they talked about everything and nothing. Eventually, Jake felt himself relaxing, the tension in his chest easing. Somehow, just hearing her voice made things feel simpler. By the time they hung up, it was nearly 3 a.m., and for the first time all night, Jake finally fell asleep. A new normal. The next few days passed in a strange, delicate balance. Jake and Laura texted more often now, not just casual messages, but real conversations that stretched late into the night. They talked about their days, shared old memories, and even traded inside jokes. But there was always something beneath the surface, a quiet tension, an unspoken acknowledgement that things had changed between them. Jake didn't tell anyone, not even his closest friends. It wasn't that he was ashamed, but he didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that you might be developing feelings for a woman who had been in your life since childhood? How do you say out loud that she wasn't just his mom's best friend anymore? Laura didn't push him. She didn't ask for anything. She just existed in his life now in a way that felt different but natural. And that scared him even more than the uncertainty. Because it was easy. Too easy. The coffee shop conversation. A few days later, Laura texted him. Laura. Hey, I was thinking. Want to grab coffee this weekend? No pressure, but I'd love to just see you. Jake hesitated for only a moment before replying. Jake, yeah, I'd like that. Saturday came, and Jake found himself at their usual cafe, arriving a few minutes early. He was nervous, which was ridiculous. It was just coffee. But this was the first time they were seeing each other outside of her house since things had changed. It felt different. Laura arrived a few minutes later, looking effortlessly beautiful in a casual dress and jacket. She smiled when she saw him, and something in his chest tightened. "Hey," she said, sitting down across from him. "Hey," he replied. They ordered their drinks, and for a while, they talked like they always had, about movies, about work, about life. But eventually, the conversation shifted. "Jake," Laura said softly, setting her coffee cup down. "I need to be honest with you." Jake tensed. "Okay." She took a deep breath. "I don't want you to feel pressured into anything. I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between whatever this is and your family. If at any point this feels like too much, I want you to know you can walk away." Jake stared at her. "You really think I'd just walk away?" Laura hesitated. "I don't know. But I don't want you to feel stuck in something you're not sure about." Jake let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "Laura, I don't feel stuck. If anything, I feel more confused than ever, but not because I don't want this. It's because I do." Her eyes softened. "But I can't pretend it's not complicated," he added. "And I can't pretend that I know how to handle this yet." Laura nodded slowly. "Neither do I." Silence stretched between them. Then she reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "We don't have to figure everything out right now," she said. "Maybe we just take it one step at a time." Jake exhaled. That was the only answer that made sense. "And so," he nodded. "Yeah," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "One step at a time. A new beginning." That night, when Jake lay in bed, he realized something. He wasn't scared anymore. For the first time since this all started, he wasn't running from the what-ifs or the doubts. Because no matter what happened next, they were in this together. A line that no longer exists. A late-night drive. Jake stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, gripping the sink as his mind spiraled. How had this happened? A few weeks ago, his life was normal. Routine. Predictable. Now, everything felt different. Laura had been a part of his world forever, but never like this. Never in a way that made his heart race when he saw her name pop up on his phone. Never in a way that made him lose sleep over what their connection meant. And now, after their talk at the coffee shop, it was real. They had both acknowledged that something was happening between them. They weren't pretending anymore. But what did that mean? Jake exhaled and checked his phone. No messages. Not that he was expecting one. Still, the thought of her was gnawing at him, demanding his attention. He grabbed his car keys on impulse, needing to clear his head. Late-night drives had always been his escape. Something about the open road, the hum of the engine, the quiet of the world, it helped him think. But tonight, all he could think about was Laura. A text that changed everything. He had been driving aimlessly for 20 minutes when his phone vibrated on the passenger seat. He glanced at it. "Laura, can't sleep. Are you awake?" Jake pulled into an empty parking lot and picked up his phone. "Jake, yeah, just out for a drive. You okay?" A moment later, his phone rang. "Hey," Laura's voice was soft but warm. "Hey," Jake said, rubbing his temple. "What's up?" "I don't know," she admitted. I couldn't stop thinking. About everything." Jake sighed. "Yeah, same here." A pause. "Where are you?" she asked. "Just out. Driving. Do you want to come over?" Jake's heart kicked into high gear. It wasn't like last time. There was no pretense of fixing something. No excuse. If he went over there now, it was for her. For them. Jake hesitated. Then his decision was made before he even realized it. "I'll be there soon," he said. An invitation that meant more. When he pulled up to Laura's house, the porch light was on, casting a soft glow over the front yard. The door opened before he even knocked. Laura stood there in a loose sweater and pajama pants, her hair slightly messy. No makeup, just raw, unfiltered her. And she was beautiful. "Hey," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "Hey," Jake replied, stepping inside. She led him into the living room, where the lamp cast a dim light over the couch. "Sorry for calling you so late," she murmured as they sat down. "Don't be." Another silence. Then she turned to face him, her gaze searching his. "Jake, are we making a mistake?" Jake exhaled slowly. "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted. "But if it was a mistake, why does it feel so right?" Her breath hitched slightly. "I don't know," she whispered. "I just know that when you're here, everything feels easier." Jake reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed against her skin, and she inhaled sharply. Neither of them moved for a moment, the air charged with something unspoken. Then, without thinking, without questioning, he leaned in. And so did she. The moment their lips met, it was like a dam breaking. Jake had expected hesitation, awkwardness, something. But there was none of that. Her hands found their way to his face, pulling him closer, as if she had been waiting for this just as long as he had. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, deliberate. Two people acknowledging something that had been building for far too long. By the time they pulled away, Jake's heart was racing. Laura looked at him, her eyes searching. That wasn't just in my head, was it?" Jake shook his head. "No, it wasn't." She exhaled, her fingers tracing his jawline. "Where do we go from here?" she asked. Jake smiled softly. "One step at a time, remember." Laura laughed, a genuine, happy sound. "Yeah, one step at a time." And just like that, the line that had once existed between them, past and present, friendship and something more, was gone. Forever. The morning after, Jake woke up to the smell of coffee. For a second, he didn't recognize where he was. Then, everything from the night before came rushing back. The late-night call, the drive, the kiss. And now, here he was, on Laura's couch, covered in a soft blanket that she must have placed over him after he fell asleep. He sat up and ran a hand through his hair. This was real. And he wasn't panicking. That surprised him more than anything. He stood, stretching, and made his way to the kitchen. Laura was standing by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. When she saw him, she smiled. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Jake replied. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Then Laura held out a cup. Coffee. Jake took it, their fingers brushing. He smirked. "Is this how you're going to bribe me into staying over more often?" Laura raised an eyebrow. "Would that be such a bad thing?" Jake chuckled. "Not at all." They sat at the kitchen table, sipping their coffee in comfortable silence. And for the first time in weeks, Jake didn't feel conflicted. He didn't feel like he was caught between right and wrong. He just felt happy. And that was enough. For now. The weight of reality. A morning that felt too easy. Jake sat across from Laura at the kitchen table, the warmth of his coffee cup grounding him. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the room. Everything felt normal. That was the part that scared him. It shouldn't have felt this easy. He had kissed his mother's best friend last night. He had stayed over at her house, even if nothing more had happened beyond that one earth-shifting kiss. Yet here they were, drinking coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. Laura tucked her legs under herself, holding her mug between both hands. "You're awfully quiet." Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Just thinking." "About?" she prompted, tilting her head slightly. He hesitated. "Everything." Laura set her coffee down, watching him carefully. "Are you regretting last night?" Jake's head snapped up. "No. God, no. That's not it at all." Relief flickered across her face, but her expression remained guarded. "Then what is it?" Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at his coffee as if it held the answers. "I don't know how to do this, Laura. I don't know what this is. I don't even know where to start." Laura let out a soft laugh. "Jake, Do you think I have all the answers? Because I don't. I'm just as lost as you are." That caught him off guard. He had always seen Laura as composed, confident, always in control. But now, she was looking at him with the same uncertainty that had been clawing at his chest all night. She took a deep breath, her fingers playing with the rim of her mug. "I know this isn't simple. I know it's complicated. And I know we can't just ignore what this could mean for your mom. For our families." She hesitated. "But I also know that I haven't felt this alive in years." Jake's eyes locked onto hers. That was the truth of it, wasn't it? This wasn't just some fleeting attraction. It wasn't just nostalgia or loneliness. It was something real. "I don't want to overthink this," Laura continued softly. "I just want to feel something again. And when I'm with you, I do." Jake swallowed hard. He could hear the vulnerability in her voice, the fear. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Me too." The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was filled with something warmer, something that felt almost like hope. Reality hits hard. Jake left Laura's house later that morning, but the weight of what had happened stayed with him. As soon as he stepped into his own apartment, his phone buzzed. "Mom. Hey, sweetie. Haven't seen you in a few days. Want to come over for dinner tonight?" Jake stared at the message, his stomach twisting. For the first time, he felt like he was keeping a secret from his mother. He hadn't done anything wrong, but it still felt like a betrayal. Shaking off the feeling, he typed back, "Jake, yeah, I'll be there." But as he put his phone down, all he could think about was the inevitable moment when everything would come crashing down. Dinner with a side of guilt. Jake arrived at his mom's house that evening, feeling like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. She greeted him with a warm hug, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside him. "I made your favorite," she said, leading him into the kitchen. "Spaghetti and garlic bread." Jake forced a smile. "You're the best, Mom." Dinner started off like any other. His mom asking about work, about his friends, about whether he was finally seeing someone. That last part nearly made him choke on his food. "You know, you really need to put yourself out there," she said, pointing her fork at him. "You're a catch, Jake. Any girl would be lucky to have you." Jake swallowed hard. Any girl. Not her best friend. "I've been busy," he said vaguely. His mom sighed dramatically. "I swear, you're turning into an old man before my very eyes." Jake laughed, but the guilt in his stomach tightened. And then, just when he thought the night couldn't get any worse, "I actually talked to Laura the other day," his mom said, casually sipping her wine. Jake's entire body went rigid. "Oh." He forced himself to sound normal. "What about?" "She just called to check in," his mom said with a smile. "We haven't been seeing each other as much lately, so it was nice to catch up." Jake's throat went dry. His mom had no idea that the reason Laura hadn't been around was because she had been with him. "You should check in on her more often," his mom added. "She's been through a lot. I think she gets lonely." Jake nearly laughed at the irony. "Yeah, Mom. I think she's doing okay." He quickly changed the subject, but the conversation left him shaken. How long could this stay a secret? How long before it all came crashing down? A moment of clarity. That night, as Jake lay in bed, he knew he had two options. One, end it now. Walk away before things got too deep, before anyone got hurt. Or two, accept what was happening. Accept that this wasn't just a passing thing, that it wasn't something they could ignore. He grabbed his phone and stared at Laura's name in his messages. He didn't know if he was making the right choice, but he knew he couldn't lie to himself anymore. "Jake, can I see you tomorrow?" A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. "Laura, yes, please." And just like that, the decision was made. There was no going back now. A choice that can't be undone. A decision that could change everything. The morning sun streamed through the window as Jake sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. He had made the decision last night. He was going to see Laura. But now, with the weight of it settling on his chest, he wasn't sure if it was the right one. For the past few weeks, everything had felt like a slow, inevitable shift toward something he couldn't control. First, it was the late-night conversations, the lingering looks, the tension in the air. Then, it was the kiss, the way her lips had felt against his, the way his body had responded before his mind could even process what was happening. And now he was past the point of no return. Jake exhaled, rubbing his face. No matter how much he tried to push it aside, he couldn't deny the truth anymore. He wanted this. He wanted her. But the fear still gnawed at him. Would they be able to keep this a secret? Could they navigate whatever was happening between them without hurting the people in their lives? Could he look his mother in the eye, knowing what he was doing? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing. "Laura, are you still coming?" Jake hesitated for only a second before typing back. "Jake, yeah. Be there soon." The drive that felt different. The drive to Laura's house felt heavier than usual. He had been there dozens of times before. Hundreds, even. As a kid, as a teenager, as an adult. But today, it felt different. Today, he wasn't just visiting a family friend. Today, he was going to her. Jake tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Was he overcomplicating this? Was it really that wrong to be with someone he cared about? Or was he just scared? By the time he pulled up to Laura's house, his mind was still at war with itself. But the second he saw her standing in the doorway, waiting for him, everything else faded away. She looked nervous. She was wearing a simple summer dress, her hair pulled back, but there was a hesitation in her posture that he had never seen before. As he stepped out of the car, she gave him a small smile. Hey, he echoed. She led him inside, shutting the door behind him. They stood there for a moment, neither of them speaking. Then Laura let out a soft breath. "I didn't know if you'd come," she admitted. Jake frowned. "Why wouldn't I?" She hesitated. "Because I don't want you to feel trapped in this. I don't want you to wake up one day and realize this was a mistake." Jake studied her face, the uncertainty in her eyes, the way she was holding her breath, waiting for his response. "I'm not here because I feel trapped," he said firmly. "I'm here because I want to be." Something in her expression softened. "You sure?" Jake stepped closer, closing the space between them. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something else. But instead, she just nodded. Then, in a whisper, she said, "Okay." A moment that couldn't be ignored. Jake wasn't sure who moved first. 1 second, they were standing there, uncertain. The next, their lips met. This kiss was different from the first one. The first had been careful, hesitant, testing the waters. This one was undeniable. Laura's hand slid into his hair, pulling him closer, and Jake's fingers gripped her waist, anchoring himself. It was real. It was happening. There was no turning back now. They moved through the house without breaking apart, their bodies finding each other like they had always belonged together. By the time they reached the bedroom, Jake knew this was a choice they could never undo. And he didn't care. Aftermath of the inevitable. Hours later, as they lay in bed, tangled in sheets and wrapped in each other, the weight of everything settled over them. Laura's head rested against his chest, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on his skin. "I can't believe this is real," she murmured. Jake swallowed hard, staring at the ceiling. "Me neither." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking at him with something between amusement and worry. "Are you freaking out yet?" Jake exhaled a laugh. "A little." Laura smiled, brushing a hand down his arm. "Me too." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Then Laura's voice dropped to a whisper. "What happens now?" Jake turned his head to look at her. He wanted to have an answer. He wanted to say they would figure it out, that they would be okay. But the truth was, He didn't know. All he knew was that there was no going back. Whatever happened next, they had already crossed the line. And now, they had to live with it. Together. The secret we can't hide forever. A new kind of reality. Jake never thought he'd wake up in Laura's bed. But here he was. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the room in shades of gold. The scent of her, vanilla and something faintly floral, clung to the sheets. His arm was draped over her waist, and her body was pressed against his, warm and familiar in a way that sent a rush of emotions through him. This was real. They had crossed the line. And there was no going back. Laura stirred slightly, letting out a quiet sigh as she turned in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his with a sleepy, contented look. "Morning," she murmured. "Morning," Jake replied, his voice lower than usual. She smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You okay?" Jake studied her, taking in the softness in her expression, the way she looked at him like he was hers. "Yeah," he admitted. "I think I am." And for the first time in weeks, it wasn't a lie. But the moment didn't last long, because reality wasn't something they could ignore forever. The first signs of trouble. They spent the rest of the morning in their own little world. Laura made coffee while Jake cooked breakfast, something that felt so normal that it almost made him forget how complicated things were. But then, as they sat at the table, Laura's phone buzzed. Jake watched as she picked it up, her expression shifting. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she let out a small sigh. "It's your mom," she said quietly. Jake's stomach twisted. It was inevitable. His mother and Laura had been close for years. His mom had already mentioned she felt like Laura was distancing herself lately. And now, after last night, he realized why that was. Because Laura had been caught between a friendship that had lasted a lifetime and something new, something unexpected. With him. Jake exhaled. "What did she say?" "She wants to meet for lunch," Laura murmured, setting her phone down. A heavy silence filled the room. Jake ran a hand over his face. "Do you think she knows something's up?" Laura hesitated before shaking her head. "No, but she probably feels it." Jake swallowed hard. This was the part he had been dreading. Because while he and Laura could pretend that what they were doing existed in its own little bubble, the truth was, it didn't. At some point, people would notice. His mom would notice. And then what? A family dinner that felt like a trap. Jake had been debating whether to tell his mom the truth when his phone buzzed again later that afternoon. "Mom, dinner at my place tonight. I feel like I never see you anymore." Guilt twisted inside him. Because she was right. Jake had been avoiding her. Not intentionally, but because every conversation felt like a ticking time bomb. Would she notice something was different? Would she see right through him? Would she know? For a split second, he considered making an excuse. But that wasn't who he was. So he texted back, "Jake, yeah, I'll be there." And just like that, the night ahead felt like an ambush. Dinner with lies and half-truths. Jake stepped into his mother's house, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. "Hey, sweetie." His mom greeted him with a warm smile, pulling him into a hug. "It feels like it's been forever." He forced a chuckle. "Yeah, work's been crazy." It wasn't a complete lie. But it wasn't the reason he had been distant, either. As they sat down for dinner, Jake tried to focus on the conversation. His mother talked about work, about her latest gardening project, about a new book she was reading. And then, "I had lunch with Laura today," she said casually, cutting into her chicken. Jake froze. His fork hovered in midair. His mom didn't seem to notice, continuing, "It was nice. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and I was starting to worry about her." Jake swallowed. "Yeah?" "She seemed different," his mom said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I can't put my finger on it. Happier, maybe, but also like she's hiding something." Jake forced himself to stay calm, to not react. "Did she say anything?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. His mom sighed. Not really. But she kept deflecting when I asked if she was seeing someone. Jake's grip on his fork tightened. His mom leaned forward slightly, as if reading his face. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? His heart pounded. This was it. This was the moment where he could either tell her the truth, risk everything, or continue the lie. Jake met his mother's gaze. And he lied. I have no idea, he said smoothly, taking a sip of water to cover the dryness in his throat. His mother studied him for a second longer before nodding. Well, whoever it is, I hope they're good to her, she said with a small smile. Laura deserves to be happy. Jake swallowed hard. He knew it was wrong. But he wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. The guilt that wouldn't go away. Later that night, Jake sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. He could still hear his mother's words echoing in his head. Laura deserves to be happy. And she was. But at what cost? Jake ran a hand through his hair. How long could they keep this up? How long before the truth had to come out? Before it wasn't just stolen moments and secret nights. Before it wasn't just them anymore. His phone buzzed. Laura. Hey, how did dinner go? Jake stared at the screen, his chest tightening. How was he supposed to tell her that the walls were already closing in? That sooner or later, this secret wouldn't be a secret anymore. That no matter how good this felt, it was only a matter of time before everything crashed down around them. He sighed, typing a response. Jake, it was fine. But we need to talk. And with that, he knew. Their world was about to change. Forever. A truth that can't stay hidden. A conversation they couldn't avoid. Jake sat on his couch, staring at his phone. Laura's reply had come almost instantly. Laura, talk. That sounds serious. Everything okay? He exhaled, rubbing his temples. How was he supposed to say this? That dinner with his mom had shaken him. That every moment they kept this hidden made him feel like a liar. That no matter how much he wanted this, he didn't know how long they could keep it going without hurting the people they cared about. He typed out a response. Jake, yeah, everything's fine. Just need to see you. Can I come over? A few moments passed. Then, Laura, of course. I'll be here. Jake grabbed his keys and left. An impossible choice. When Laura opened the door, she already looked worried. Hey, she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. Hey, Jake replied, stepping into the house that had started to feel more like home than his own place. They walked to the living room, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Laura turned to face him, arms crossed. Okay, what's going on? Jake hesitated for only a second before speaking. I had dinner with my mom tonight, he said. Laura's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly against her arms. And she knows something's different, Jake admitted. She had lunch with you today. She said you seemed happier, but also like you were hiding something. Laura let out a slow breath, looking away. I tried to act normal, but I guess I wasn't convincing enough. Jake stepped closer. Laura, we can't keep this a secret forever. Her eyes met his. I know. Silence. Then, I'm scared, Jake, she admitted. Not of what we have. Not of how I feel about you, but of what happens when we tell her. Jake nodded. Me too. Laura swallowed. Do you regret this? He didn't even hesitate. No. Relief flashed in her eyes. But I don't know how we're supposed to move forward without hurting her, he added. Laura was quiet for a long time before she spoke. Maybe we don't. Jake frowned. What do you mean? Laura sat down on the couch, staring at the floor. Maybe there isn't a way to do this without hurting someone. Maybe we just have to accept that. Jake sat down beside her, his hand finding hers. You're saying we just rip off the Band-Aid. Laura gave a small, almost sad smile. Wouldn't it be worse if she found out some other way? If we let this go on too long, and she feels like we were lying to her. Jake sighed. She was right. They couldn't keep living in this bubble, pretending the outside world didn't exist. It was time. Okay, Jake said, squeezing her hand. Then we tell her. The confession that changed everything. The next evening, Jake walked into his mother's house feeling like he was about to be thrown into a battlefield. Laura was right beside him, her fingers interlaced with his. His mother greeted them at the door with a warm smile, but the second she saw them standing together, her expression changed. "Is something wrong?" she asked cautiously. Jake took a deep breath. "Mom, we need to talk." They sat down in the living room, and Laura shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Jake's mother looked between the two of them, her concern deepening. "You're both making me nervous." Jake exchanged a glance with Laura before turning back to his mother. "Mom, Laura and we've been seeing each other." Silence. Complete, deafening silence. His mother blinked, then laughed. "I'm sorry." "What?" Jake's stomach twisted. "We didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." Laura spoke up, her voice gentle. "I never wanted to hurt you, but Jake and there's something real between us." His mother stared at them, her face unreadable. Then she slowly set her cup down and stood. "Mom," Jake started. "I need a minute," she said, holding up a hand. She paced the room, running a hand through her hair. Okay, I just need to process this." Jake and Laura remained silent, watching her carefully. Finally, his mother turned to them, arms crossed. "How long?" Jake hesitated. "A few weeks." His mother nodded slowly, lips pressing into a thin line. Then she turned to Laura. "And you've known my son since he was a kid. And now, what? You're dating him?" Laura swallowed. "I know it's unexpected. And I know it's a lot. But this isn't some fling. She stopped, looking at Jake before taking a breath. "I love him." Jake's heart pounded. It was the first time either of them had said it out loud. His mother inhaled sharply, her expression softening for just a moment before she masked it again. "This is a lot," she admitted, "and I'm not going to pretend I understand it." Jake nodded. "I get that." She exhaled. "But do you really think this is a good idea?" Jake didn't hesitate. "Yeah, Mom, I do." His mother looked at him for a long time, searching his face for something. Then, finally, she let out a deep breath. "I don't like this," she admitted. "But I love you both, and if this is what makes you happy." She paused, shaking her head with a small laugh. "Then I guess I just have to get used to it." Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Really?" he asked. His mother rolled her eyes. "What did you think I'd disown you?" Jake and Laura exchanged relieved glances before his mother's voice turned stern again. "But if you hurt him, Laura, I swear." "I won't," Laura promised. His mother exhaled, then gave them both a long look before sighing. "I need a drink." Jake laughed. "Same." His mother shook her head with a tired smile. "I don't get this, but I'll try." And that was enough. For now. A love that was worth the risk. Later that night, as Jake and Laura left his mother's house, he reached for her hand. She squeezed it gently, looking up at him. "That went better than expected," she said with a small laugh. Jake smirked. "Yeah, only minor emotional damage." Laura chuckled before turning serious. "You meant what you said back there." Jake met her gaze. "Yeah, I love you, Laura." A slow, warm smile spread across her face. "Good," she murmured, pulling him close. "Because I love you too." Jake kissed her, deep and unhurried, knowing that whatever happened next, they had already won. They had chosen each other, and that was worth everything.